Hey, I'm Father Roderick and welcome back to my channel. I just watched chapter 4 of the book of Boba Fett and I'm going to give you my spoiler-free review. So whether you watched the episode already or you still are going to watch it, no problem, don't worry, I'm not going to spoil anything, but I'm going to share with you my feeling about this episode. And if there's one thing I want to know is if you agree with me that this episode is amazing. It is so good. And I feel like this is Star Wars at its best. It's firing at all cylinders. There is almost no flaw in this episode. And I think a lot of the fans that were a bit disappointed with the previous episode are going to be overjoyed with what they see happening in this episode. It's got all the right ingredients and it is masterfully executed. I'm going to go through the various things that I loved, and at the end of this video I will tell you what I think is the secret sauce of this episode and why it is so good. So stick with me until the end. I'll keep it short and concise, so I will make it worth your while. Stay tuned. First of all, this story continues a few of the story threads from the previous episode, but it also kind of takes a little break to finish a very important process of this first half of the story. You have to keep in mind, this is the 4th chapter, and we're at the midpoint of the story, so we are now closing off this whole backstory, these flashbacks, all this, filling in the blanks with what happened to Boba Fett, how things got to the point where we are now in this episode, and from here, the story is going to venture into new territory. And I think that they did a perfect job putting the foundations in place, the relationships, you understand how the people think. But of course, we don't know, and it's very hard to predict what's coming next because we're kind of done with looking back and we're going to look forward. That's very exciting. And so it makes sense that this episode, before it starts to develop some of the things that the previous episode was setting up, they're taking a little bit of a pause here, although rest assured, there is no pause whatsoever in the way you experience this episode. There's so much action, it's so well paced, it keeps you on the edge of your seat, and there's always something new that will make you go like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. But there are a few unresolved things from the previous episode that I had some theories about as well, and they didn't follow up on that. But I think it's fine. We will see later on if they will kind of go back to what they set up or not. Maybe it's just what it is. But this story focuses on a very important last element that still needed to be filled in. And that's this relationship between Boba Fett and Fennec Shand. We know from interviews, and I'm sure you've seen some of those, that there is fantastic chemistry between the actors. Tem Morrison and Ming-Na Wen, I should say. They have this humor, they play off each other. And in this episode, I feel that it's really working so well. It's so visible on screen. Their dialogue is great, but the acting, especially the chemistry, the on-screen chemistry is amazing. I thought in previous episodes, the role, especially of Fennec, was a bit toned down, a little bit in the background, but here she plays an equal part, I think, in the story, and I love the writers for doing that. It's what this story needed, it's what this relationship needed. So that is the main function of this episode. It also has an important function in connecting the story tissue of the Book of Boba Fett with previous stories and movies, especially The Mandalorian. You will see a lot of cross connections with The Mandalorian, and that's just awesome because we all love The Mandalorian, right? So it does connect with the previous episode, does it in a very smart way, and it points our focus on the future. From now on, it's going to be so exciting. I can't wait. So I think this is the end of the flashbacks, although the flashbacks in this episode were among the highlights of the entire series so far. What else did I like? Let's start with what you see, the visuals. I am super impressed by the establishing shots. There were already a few beautiful establishing shots. So that's, for instance, when you see the city of Mos Espa, you've got that flyover. This episode shows you just amazing imagery of the landscape of Tatooine, of certain familiar places, and it's stuff that we've never seen before. It's gorgeous. And what I'm most impressed with is that we see new parts of familiar buildings, and you get to understand how things relate to one another. So that's really well done. And another thing that impressed me very much is, of course, you know that they are filming a lot of these scenes in a virtual environment where the set is surrounded by huge LED screens. It's called stagecraft. And so they don't have to build a lot of the backgrounds. They just project it with CGI technology. But where my issue with that technology used to be in the past is that sometimes these sets would look a little bit small, confined. If you know how they film it, you kind of feel like it's still a set. This episode just completely opens it up, and they have this flawless mix of the stagecraft technology, the physical props on set, and then CGI set extensions. And I've never seen Tatooine this beautiful. And I would love to see this episode in IMAX. I think it deserves it. It is so beautiful. It's unlike anything we've seen before in Star Wars, and it's just amazing. That's not the only thing that is beautiful. The costumes, they've been, I think, really beautiful and colorful and very diverse. There's a lot of variety. I think cosplayers are going to have a blast recreating some of those costumes that you see. So those are amazing. Makeup, prosthetics on aliens, faces, humans, well done. And then there are a couple of physical creatures. You may know that for the Rancor in the previous episode, they created this physical Rancor head, which they can touch and interact with, the actors, and that totally works, and it suddenly makes the Rancor so much more real than in the stop motion version that we saw in Return of the Jedi or just CGI. Well, they did the same with another familiar creature here. They created a physical head, and it's animated, it's puppeteered, and it's amazing. There is all of a sudden this new interaction that was not possible in the past just by the way they filmed it. They used real animals and then they just put like a wig on top of the animal. That's no longer necessary. They have a fully animated huge head here that they're working with, and so they can do new things with that physical prop that I think you're going to love. There is also another type of, well, not creature, but certain beings, let's call it that way, in this episode, that are puppeteered. I don't know how they do it. It's so well done. I think they're using like marionette technology, or maybe puppeteering like they do with Grogu. But it's so funny, and it's incredible. We see a couple of instances where I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I want to have a physical, like a toy or maybe a Lego set of this. It's so inventive, creative, and there are some jokes here that I won't spoil, but you will recognize it when you see it, that harken back to a certain villain in the prequels. Let's call it General Grievous. You know his fighting style, how he uses his various limbs? There's something in this episode that refers to that. You will recognize it, especially if you know that's what it refers to or kind of plays with. Then the physical animation and props are amazing, but so is the CGI. There is a CGI creature in the heart of this episode that we've seen before, but now it's animated and designed better than ever. It's going to blow you away. That was a scene where I was almost climbing on top of my chair and just cheering the cheering everybody on. It was just so amazing. This could have been part of a movie, and people would still talk about it afterwards as the highlight of the movie. And this is television. It is mind-blowing what we get to see as Star Wars fans. So, and it was the CGI animation of that creature that made me also a bit sad. like looking back at the special editions of the original trilogy, I was thinking if only George Lucas would have had access to this kind of technology. I mean, imagine the possibilities. I'm almost hoping for like a special edition that with what they develop now on Tatooine and the way it all looks, they could go back to the original Return of the Jedi and maybe A New Hope and just do a makeover of the special editions. But maybe that's heresy for a lot of, traditional Star Wars fans. But I'm thinking as long as it improves, sure, they can do so much better than what George Lucas did at the time of the special editions. There are 2 fighting scenes in this episode that are going to make a lot of fans happy because they wanted to see more fighting, more, action, and show us Boba Fett as with all his skills and everything. Well, you got to keep in mind, this is not just Boba Fett here. We've got Fennec as well. And there are 2 fights in this episode that are so extremely well choreographed and combined with set pieces, and there's movement and I don't know how they pulled it off. I'm looking at that, I'm thinking like, so what is CGI, what is practical here? It is such a perfect blend, but no matter if it were practical or CGI, what matters is of course the choreography, and it feels like really like punchy and whoa, you're gonna love this. This is how I would hope every future fighting scene and encounter will, what it will look like. It's brilliant. Also, well, harkening back to what I said previously about this one CGI creature that is so well done, that action scene in the heart of this episode is absolutely stunning. For me, it was 100% perfect. It also has a bit of a, no, I can't say that without spoiling it, but it's again a new genre, a trope from a certain genre of movies that is introduced here that I don't think we've seen that often in Star Wars, but it works. It really works. I was like, oh, totally amazing. Then in combination with all that action and the fighting and this, some of the seriousness of the dialogue, there are also some very, very funny scenes. And especially what struck me was the comedic timing that was so good. There were a few laugh out loud moments here, and it was all, it wasn't really like jokes or anything, or some of that more, I don't know, simple humor that sometimes George Lucas introduced in like Jar Jar stepping into some Banta Poodoo, that sort of stuff. But it's all like, it's funny because it's so well paced. Kudos again to the makers of this episode. Now, the editing is very important. That's always something you kind of underestimate. You think that an episode is just, you film it and it's the actors and it's the special effects, but the editing determines the pacing, determines the dialogue, how well it comes across. And the editing also kind of generates the overall emotion that you have, and how a story will kind of pull you in and then just make you super engaged and then slows down again. And the editing in this episode was, I think, the best that we've seen so far, especially the overall structure of the episode. And that's done in editing, that's done in post-production, where you kind of put all the pieces in place and you make sure that it feels like an organic story. That was also one of the biggest issues that I had with the previous episode, where I felt the editing was a little bit off and it felt unfinished, or it was abruptly ending, and it was so short. And for me, the duration of this episode is about 45 minutes. That is the ideal length for a Star Wars story, I would say. I would hope that in the future they will always do, 45 to 50 minutes. For me, that works. 28 minutes last week? It's too short. And I almost feel like maybe it was so short because a lot of stuff ended up on the cutting room floor. Maybe in post-production, during editing, they realized that some of the stuff that they filmed, especially in the second half with the chase and everything, that it just didn't work. So maybe that's why it's so short. Maybe they just gave us, well, what they thought was good enough. Anyway, perfect editing here. The as I said, the dialogue in this episode is amazing. Not just the writing, but also the acting, the directing is great. There is a lot of wisdom in this episode. You can learn, and you can actually learn from Boba Fett, from his managerial style, how he brings people together. There is a lot of negotiation in this episode, and it's just textbook. This is how you do it. This is how you bring people on board. Team building. There are really things you can learn from this episode. And I'd love to expand on that in a future video, because I literally learned stuff like that's how you do it. That's how I make the streets here in my town safe. Just kidding. As I said, there are a few great tie-ins with The Mandalorian, not just story-wise, but also musically. The music is great. It is a particular style. Some people always kind of miss the orchestral style that we are used to from John Williams. But since The Mandalorian, I feel that this kind of music works with this type of story. And there are always a few moments where they kind of use familiar themes, and then you get a little bit more of a bigger sounding music. Here in the action scenes, I think that the music just totally worked. Was very well done. I love that the entire story had focus. No more gratuitous action scenes like that chase in the previous episode. That felt a little bit out of place. It felt, I don't know. I don't want to be too negative, because there was a lot I loved about the previous episode. But what is really good in this episode is that every part of the episode moves the story forward. There is nothing in this, that's why it's so well paced, that's why you keep on the edge of your seat, because there is no slowdown. There's nothing where you think, oh, that's just, pleasing the fans, or no. Like, every scene is a surprise, and there is a lot of variety in this episode. Not every 5 minutes you get a different genre, different interaction, you get something that happens, and it's just, it gives this episode the quality of a movie. In 45 minutes, you feel like you've seen an entire movie because of that really, really good pacing and the variety in the script. And nevertheless, despite that, it's focusing on that relationship between Boba and Fennec, which I think is going to be the foundation for the last few episodes. I finally want to talk about what I think is the secret sauce of this episode. Why is it that good? Of course, a lot of these episodes are planned in advance and storyboarded and animated. You've got the writers, they write all these episodes. But what makes or breaks the final product, I think, is the direction. The director in a series like this is a little bit less hands-on compared to a movie. In a movie, a director is also sometimes the writer. George Lucas, he wrote the story and he directed it, because this is, a lot of work per episode. That's why they use a lot of different directors, so that every director can focus on 1 or 2 episodes, and there is so much that needs to be done. And a lot of it is just also executive work. You just have to make sure everything is filmed, that you have covered everything that was planned before, especially because of all the complexities with working with CGI and virtual sets and whatnot. But ultimately, what the director, how the director can contribute to making an episode a success is the directing of the actors. And it's also, I think, the overall balance, timing in dialogue, timing in humor, with exactly the same script and exactly the same crew and exactly the same pre-production. A mediocre director can still make dialogue and humor feel stilted and misfire. And if you have a good director, everything just clicks together, and with the same ingredients, you get like a chef's meal, a Michelin star meal, or you get just, a hamburger, and yeah, it's fine, it's good. The ingredients are nice, it's fresh food, but yeah, it's not haute cuisine. That's, I think, the secret sauce, no pun intended, of this episode.